Welcome to the fifth dialogue of the ISPI series, The War and the World. The war in Ukraine is a game changer for international security, as ISPI has been covering this incredible event minute by minute, day by day. But within this series, we have invited, and we are still inviting, prominent speakers to look just around the corner and see what the near future holds for global politics and the economy after the war. Today, I have really a pleasure to talk about the future of China as a world power with Professor Susan Shirk. Professor Shirk is chair of the 21st Century China Center at the University of California, San Diego, one of the most influential experts working on US-China relations and Chinese politics. So thank you very much, Susan, for joining us today.
My pleasure, thanks.
So my first question, Susan, is the most obvious one. What's your take on this conflict, and what are your expectations about future developments of this conflict? Is it going to last for a while, for months, or even years, as for instance Stoltenberg, the NATO, said? Please, Susan.
Well, of course, it's very uncertain. That's what makes it so challenging to the foreign policy makers in Beijing, as well as in Washington, because we don't know what the outcome of the war will be, how long the Ukrainians will be able to resist, even without direct assistance from NATO or the United States or other countries. And certainly from the standpoint of the United States, I think it's kind of as if we're fighting a war with both hands tied behind our back, because we feel we can't actually send forces. And that's the perspective of NATO as well. From the Chinese side, they face a challenge of not knowing how badly Russia will do. And certainly now they're trying to come to grips with the fact that they ended up even though they claim neutrality, they ended up tacitly supporting Russia, and they don't know what the outcome will be. And I think they're quite disturbed that Russia is doing so poorly, that its weapons, its military forces have not performed very well. So in addition to all the other risks that they face by aligning themselves with Russia, they're also confronting the fact that Russia is much weaker, even militarily, than they probably thought they were.
Since we are focusing on Russia, let me go straight to the point. You already mentioned this, but how solid is this tie between Beijing and Moscow? Because when Putin and Xi met at the beginning of the Winter Olympics, actually they talked about not really an alliance, because the Chinese word for it is not an alliance, but it's more like a partnership. So my question to you is, in your view, how solid is this relation between Beijing and Moscow?
Well, how solid? That's difficult to say. On the one hand, Xi Jinping definitely feels a personal and ideological affinity with Vladimir Putin as a fellow strongman leader, and both of them feel that they are being confronted, pressured, challenged by the United States in particular, as well as the rest of the West. So they feel that they share a sense of victimization and threat from the West. But on the other hand, there's very little love lost between the Chinese people and the Russian people. There's a whole history of actually fighting along the border, going even back before the communist period. Chinese have a sense of grievance against the Russians for, they believe, stealing territory from them. And if you recall, the beginning of the rapprochement between China and the United States was in part motivated on the Chinese side by this sense of threat from the Russians. So it's kind of an instrumental relationship. Sometimes we say they're partners of convenience. On the other hand, does that mean that the United States or Western Europe could put a wedge between China and Russia and get China to stand in a very forthright way against the Russian invasion of Ukraine? So far, no. But what's, of course, the most significant thing is that, as far as we know at present, there's no sign of any tangible assistance by China to Russia. Military assistance, buying energy, yes, I think that's kind of carved out for other countries as well. But tangible aid to the Russian side, that hasn't happened. Now, you have to ask the question, is China not helping Russia because it doesn't want to be punished by the United States and by Europe with secondary sanctions, it sees how devastating the financial sanctions in particular have been, unprecedented. And so China is a lot more integrated in the global economy and with its European and American trading partners than Russia is. So it certainly would have a lot to lose. And you know that the Europeans and the Americans are watching closely, scrupulously, to see any sign of Chinese assistance. And so far, we believe there hasn't been, but is that because of the need to avoid secondary sanctions, or is it because there's actually controversy within the Chinese elite and within the Chinese public about what stance China should take toward the Russian invasion?
But Susan, if what you say is true, I mean, with China trying to watch from distance what is going on, there are many people saying, well, Russia is the perfect negotiator, trying to, to find an agreement between Ukraine and Russia. Do you think this is possible, and is China really willing to play this game?
I don't think so. I think I really don't think China wants to be the negotiator or would be a suitable negotiator, because it talks about neutrality, and of course it did have actually quite a good relationship with Ukraine. I believe it was Ukraine's largest trading partner, just like many other countries in the world. But China has no real qualifications to be the mediator. No experience, very little trust in the world of China today. And it's hard for me to believe that it would be a suitable mediator or negotiator. So that notion I would debunk. I think it's a nice hope, but it will never be realized.
Stay like this, like a hope. But let me now turn to the US, because before this crisis, everybody said, well, one of the few things which puts together Republicans and Democrats is, this, perception of a strong competition against China. So my question is this war changing this now that the spotlight has been placed more and or again on Russia and moved away from China?
There's no sign of that in the United States. In some ways, it just connects the two countries in people's minds. And especially the way President Biden has framed global politics as a contest between democracy and autocracy, that causes people to ally Russia and China together. I would hope that the Biden administration will talk a little bit more in the weeks and months to come to acknowledge China's not assisting Russia, so that people might at least differentiate these two countries in their minds and think about how we could induce China. I mean, it's not going to split with Russia, and it's not going to change its assertive, aggressive foreign policies just because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But it is an opportunity for China to try to restore some stability in its relations with the United States, and for the United States to do the same with China. And I think we should be smart about trying to do that in order to reduce our own security risks and the risks of a iron curtain that divides the entire world into two blocks.
And you think that President Biden is ready to do so? I mean, in view of midterm elections, and since he knows perfectly, you already answered.
No, I think our domestic politics inclines the Biden administration to continuing to talk about the China threat, because certainly for the first more than a year of the Biden administration, it was a way for the president to try to get bipartisan support for big spending bills in Congress to try to strengthen ourselves. We have a lot of mending to do economically, research and development, infrastructure, and politically in the United States. So I'd say that China was a kind of useful foil. It was the one issue, as you've noted, where there is a strong bipartisan consensus. But, I have to say, the problem with that bipartisan consensus is, are we really thinking sensibly about the trade-offs of everything we do? Are we maybe overshooting on the China threat? I mean, especially when you compare it to the behavior of Russia now, it certainly doesn't represent a direct threat to the United States or to our allies, really, other than Taiwan, possibly a direct threat.
Yeah, exactly, and a red line, of course. We just have 1 minute, so in my last minute, I would like to ask you, seen from the United States, How do you perceive the European response? Because my feeling is that the more we raise sanctions, and especially if we touch the energy sector, which is something viable, possible to the US, much more difficult to the EU, the more we'll see divergences and fractures inside the EU. What's your view from the US standpoint?
Well, I think from the US standpoint, we value this new European unity and this revived close relationship between Europe and the United States. It's so important. And I think the Biden administration will want to do everything it can to sustain that, and whatever that takes. But of course, the most immediate goal is to discourage Vladimir Putin in his brutal attack on Ukraine to try to save lives in Ukraine. So we have a longer term interests, but we also have these very immediate interests. And the only real, other than providing military equipment to the Ukrainian side, which I do think there will be increasing pressure in the United States to do more than we're doing. Other than that, we have these sanctions, and we're going to want to make sure that they actually bite and affect Vladimir Putin's decision calculus.
So since time is over, I will resist the temptation to ask you what is going to happen if Trump is reelected? What happens to transatlantic relations? But as I said, I will resist the temptation, and I thank you so much, Susan, for your availability, and I hope you will join us again in the near future. Thank you so much.
I hope so too. Thanks very much.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.